The sun burned low over the Texas plains, pouring molten gold across a land that seemed endless. The horizon shimmered with heat, yet the air carried the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder. Clara Whitfield paused at the edge of her corral, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. It had been another long day of mending fences, watering the stubborn herd, and holding together a ranch that had once belonged to her husband. Since his passing, every acre of land, every creaking barn door, every dry well had become her burden alone. The widowed woman was only 26, but the loneliness carved lines into her face as if she had weathered twice as many years. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, restless and uneasy. Clara was about to head inside when she heard it, hoofbeats. Not the measured rhythm of cattle moving, nor the familiar gait of a neighbor's horse, but the desperate, pounding staccato of a chase. Her breath caught. She squinted toward the dust, rising in the distance. A group of riders thundered across the open land, rifles glinting in the fading light. They were too far to recognize, but the urgency of their pursuit sent a chill racing down her spine. Instinct told her to move inside, to bar the door and keep silent. Yet something else tugged at her, the sound of another horse breaking away from the main group. She hurried toward the creek that cut behind her ranch, boots sinking into the dry soil. There, hidden in the reeds, she saw him. A man slumped from his horse, tumbling into the dirt. His chest rose and fell shallowly, and blood stained the fringe of his deerskin shirt. His hair was long, black as raven feathers, and his skin bore the sun's bronze. Beads and feathers hung from his braids, now darkened with sweat. Clara froze. He was Comanche. Her heart pounded like a drum. Every story she had ever heard of Comanche raids, every whispered warning from neighbors, crashed through her mind. These men were painted as enemies, merciless and untamed. To harbor one was unthinkable, dangerous. And yet, as she looked down at him, he was not a story. He was a man, wounded, gasping for life, eyes flickering open with a mixture of pain and defiance. Their gazes locked. Clara's breath hitched. He tried to rise, staggering, but fell back to his knees. For a moment she thought he might reach for a weapon, but instead his hand pressed against the wound at his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. He was no threat, at least not now. The hoofbeats grew louder. The posse was close. Clara's mind raced. She could let them find him, wash her hands of this burden, and earn her neighbors' approval. They would call her wise, perhaps even brave, for not succumbing to pity. But something deeper stirred within her, something that no amount of fear could silence. She remembered her husband, feverish in their final days together, how helpless he had looked as death took him slowly. She remembered kneeling at his bedside, whispering prayers that someone stronger might deliver him. Now here lay another man, enemy or not, abandoned to fate. Clara swallowed hard. "Lord help me," she whispered, before slipping her arms beneath his shoulders. The warrior groaned but did not resist as she half-dragged, half-lifted him toward the barn. He was heavy, each step a battle, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She reached the barn just as the thunder of hooves swept past her land. Dust billowed across the fields, and men's voices called out, sharp and urgent, "Tracks lead this way." Clara froze, breath lodged in her throat. She crouched behind the barn door, the wounded Comanche barely conscious beside her. Shadows stretched long across the dirt as riders slowed near her homestead. She recognized some voices, neighbors from town, men who had once offered her condolences at her husband's grave. Now they cursed and spat, swearing to catch the savage, who had slipped through their fingers. A heavy fist pounded on her door. "Mrs. Whitfield, you seen anything? An Indian rode through these parts." Her hands trembled. A single word could save her from suspicion, even earn her gratitude in town. Yet the man at her feet stirred faintly, and she saw his eyes open again, dark, steady, refusing to beg, but carrying a quiet dignity. She could not betray him. Clara stood tall and walked to the porch, forcing calm into her voice. "No one's come this way. Just me and the cattle." The men exchanged doubtful glances. One spat into the dirt, another scanned the property. Finally, their leader gave a grunt. "If he's hiding out here, you'd best tell us. That kind bring trouble." "I'll keep watch," Clara said, steady as stone. After a long pause, the posse moved on, their horses kicking up dust as they vanished into the horizon. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's knees weakened, but she refused to collapse. She returned to the barn, where the Comanche lay breathing shallowly. His lips moved faintly, whispering words she did not know. "I don't know why I did this," Clara muttered, crouching beside him. "But if I let you die here, I'd never forgive myself." She fetched water, tore strips from an old sheet, and pressed them to his wound. The blood was warm, sticky, relentless, but she did not falter. The warrior flinched but endured, his gaze never leaving hers. She sensed no hatred there, only a wary respect, as if he understood the risk she had taken. Hours passed. The sky deepened into twilight, stars scattered across its canvas. In the barn's dim light, Clara sat back against a bale of hay, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The warrior's breathing steadied, though each inhale still sounded like a battle. She knew this was only the beginning. Hiding him would bring danger, if not from the posse, then from his own people, should they misunderstand her intentions. Yet she also knew there was no turning back. She had chosen compassion, and with it came consequences. Clara glanced at the man once more. "Stranger," she whispered, "what storm have I brought upon myself by saving you?" Outside, the prairie stretched silent, but in that silence she felt the rumble of coming conflict, like distant thunder rolling beneath the earth. The night after the posse rode past, the plains grew still again, though Clara could not find peace. Every creak of the wooden beams, every rustle of the prairie wind made her flinch. In the barn, the wounded Comanche stirred restlessly, fever rising as the infection threatened to take him. She tended to him with the determination of someone who had already made her choice and must now see it through, though doubt gnawed at her. His breathing came in ragged waves. Clara knelt beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead, whispering prayers in English he could not understand. Yet, even through the fever, his eyes followed her. They were deep, dark, unwavering. She did not know his name, nor why the posse hunted him, but she felt the gravity of his presence, as though he carried not only his own fate, but that of many others. When dawn broke, painting the sky in pink and orange hues, Clara ventured outside. The prairie lay deceptively calm. She gathered water from the well, her eyes scanning the horizon. That was when she noticed the tracks, not of one horse, but many, fresh, pressed into the soft earth, not far from her property. Her heart leapt into her throat. The posse had not returned. This was something else. By midday, the truth arrived in a shadow of dust on the horizon. Riders, dozens of them. Their silhouettes grew sharper with every passing second. Comanche warriors, fierce and unyielding, adorned in feathers, beads, and painted faces. They came with the quiet power of a storm, their presence radiating a warning Clara could feel in her very bones. Her first instinct was to hide, but she knew the futility of it. Instead, she stood frozen on the porch, hands gripping the rail as the warriors surrounded her homestead. Their ponies stamped and snorted, circling like wolves. Spears gleamed, bows were drawn, and dark eyes fixed upon her. At their front rode a man older than the rest, his face lined with wisdom and weather, his gaze sharp as flint. He raised a hand, and the circle tightened. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. She knew enough of frontier whispers to understand what this meant. They had come for the man in her barn, the one she had saved. One warrior dismounted, approaching with the grace of a predator. His eyes swept over her, cold and questioning. He spoke in Comanche, words clipped, fierce, unintelligible. Clara shook her head helplessly. I don't understand." The man barked something to the others, and a murmur rippled through the group. They knew. Somehow they already knew. The barn door creaked behind her. Clara spun, her heart lurching. The wounded warrior staggered into the light. One arm pressed against his bandaged side, the other braced on the doorframe. Despite his weakness, his presence commanded silence. Every warrior's gaze locked on him, and in that instant, Clara realized who he was. Not a nameless fugitive, not some raider left behind. He was someone important. The elder dismounted, walking toward him, with deliberate steps. He spoke in their tongue, his voice carrying authority. The wounded man answered, his tone steady though his body trembled. Clara caught fragments, names, perhaps, or oaths, but their meaning escaped her. Then the elder's eyes shifted to her. His gaze was piercing, as though trying to unravel the mystery of why this white woman had sheltered their own. Clara swallowed hard, her palms slick with sweat. She had no words to bridge the chasm between them. She could only hope her actions spoke for her. At last, the elder raised his hand again, and the warriors lowered their weapons, though tension still thrummed in the air like a bowstring. Clara exhaled shakily, but the relief was short-lived. The elder gestured sharply, and 2 warriors stepped forward. They pointed toward Clara's house, then to the barn. The message was clear. They would search, take what they needed, and perhaps decide her fate afterward. Clara's chest tightened. "Please," she whispered, though she doubted they understood. "This is my home." One warrior brushed past her roughly, heading inside. She wanted to protest, to defend the small world she had fought so hard to keep intact, but fear kept her rooted. She looked instead at the wounded man, the one she had saved. His eyes met hers briefly, and for the first time she saw something beyond pain or pride. A flicker of recognition. Gratitude, perhaps. The warriors searched swiftly, their movements precise. When they emerged again, they carried nothing, yet their scowls deepened as if unsatisfied. The elder turned back to the wounded man, speaking in tones that rose like the beginning of an argument. Clara could feel the heat in the exchange, though she could not understand the words. The younger man responded, firm, defiant. He pointed toward her, then to himself. The elder's eyes narrowed. The circle of warriors stirred restlessly. Clara's stomach churned. Were they debating her fate? Would they punish her for interfering? Or worse, use her as leverage in whatever conflict bound them? Suddenly, the wounded man collapsed to one knee, his strength failing. Clara rushed forward instinctively, catching him before he could fall fully. Gasps rippled through the gathered warriors, arrows tightening in their grips. Clara froze, realizing how her gesture might be interpreted. Yet she could not release him, not when his life teetered so precariously. The elder raised his hand, halting the warriors. His eyes studied Clara, then the man leaning against her. Slowly, his expression shifted, not softened, but altered, as though reconsidering. He barked a command, and the warriors lowered their weapons again, though the air still crackled with suspicion. Clara eased the man back to the barn, her movements careful. He groaned but held on to consciousness. She felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, judging, calculating. At last the elder spoke again, his words carrying finality. The warriors responded in unison, then began to withdraw, their ponies turning toward the horizon. Yet not all rode away. A small group remained, their posture watchful, as if tasked with ensuring she did not betray the one she had chosen to save. The elder mounted his horse, but before leaving, he cast one last look at Clara. It was not approval, nor was it threat. It was something more complex, acknowledgment of a choice that bound her fate to theirs. When the dust settled and silence returned, Clara slumped against the barn door, her heart racing. The warrior inside had drawn his people to her doorstep. By saving him, she had invited an entire nation's gaze upon her life. She looked at the man again, lying weak but alive. "Who are you?" she whispered, though no answer came. Beyond the horizon, the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the plains. Clara sensed the storm had only begun, that her act of mercy would not end with gratitude, but with trials she could scarcely imagine. The prairie had never felt so heavy with silence. Clara stood at the threshold of her barn, staring at the distant line of warriors who had remained after their elder departed. They sat astride their ponies in grim patience, their dark eyes fixed on her homestead. Sentinels, guardians, or executioners, she could not tell. Their presence turned her land, once a place of toil and solitude, into a prison bounded by shadows of distrust. Inside, the wounded Comanche drifted in and out of consciousness. Fever still clung to him, though his breathing had steadied after the confrontation. Clara replaced the damp cloth on his forehead, her hands trembling as she worked. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "You've brought them here, and now I'm caught between you and the rest of the world." Her words faded into the dim barn air, yet his hand twitched, fingers curling weakly, as though trying to grasp her meaning. Clara froze. For all his silence, he seemed aware, tethered to her through some invisible thread neither language nor custom could sever. By midday, the watchful warriors dismounted. Some built a small fire beyond her fence line, their figures stark against the prairie's vast openness. They were not leaving. Clara's unease deepened. Every movement she made, fetching water, feeding the livestock, tending her hearth, was under their gaze. Her isolation, once chosen, now became suffocating. She thought of the neighboring settlers, of church gatherings she rarely attended, of faces that would harden with suspicion if they knew. To them, she was already an outsider, a widow who spoke too little and lived too far from town. If word spread that she had saved a Comanche, her name would be cursed, her home branded a traitor's refuge. But to the Comanche, was she any different? She was the woman of the enemy, bound to the people who had seized their land and hunted their kin. The elder's gaze still burned in her memory, sharp with calculation. Had her act of mercy changed anything? Or had it only made her a question they had yet to answer? As dusk fell, the wounded man stirred again. His lips moved, whispering words Clara could not understand. She leaned close, straining to catch even a syllable. Finally, he opened his eyes, clouded with pain yet sharpened by intent. With effort, he spoke a single word, his voice rough as gravel. "Dakota." She blinked. "Dakota." He nodded faintly, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Clara realized at last, this was his name. It was the first bridge between them, fragile but real. She repeated it softly. "Dakota." Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps even trust. Then exhaustion claimed him again. That night, Clara sat by the barn door, sleepless. The warriors' campfire glowed, like an ember on the horizon, never wavering. She imagined the settlers, too, not far behind. The posse that had hunted Dakota would not abandon their pursuit. If they returned and found Comanche warriors outside her property, the land would become a battlefield. Her mind raced. Was there any path left untouched by fire? If she turned Dakota over, perhaps the Comanche would leave, but his death would haunt her. If she protected him, she risked the wrath of both her neighbors and the warriors, who still questioned her. Every choice cut deeper than the last. By morning, the decision seemed no closer. Clara carried water to the barn, her movements heavy with fatigue. Dakota watched her this time, his eyes clearer, though pain lingered in the tightness of his jaw. He spoke again, haltingly, as though each word cost him strength. "You, not enemy." The broken English startled her. She paused, pitcher in hand, staring. "You understand me?" He nodded once, slow. His accent was thick, his voice strained, but the meaning was undeniable. Relief and dread mingled in her chest. At last, they could speak. Yet now, there was no escaping the truth. "Your people," she hesitated, glancing toward the horizon where the warriors still waited. "They don't trust me, and mine will call me a traitor. You've put me between two fires." Dakota's gaze softened, though his expression carried the weight of a man who knew what such fires could consume. "You chose," he murmured. "Save me." "Yes," she whispered. "But what happens now?" He said nothing. His silence was not empty. It was a silence filled with history, with battles fought and lost, with grief too vast to explain. Clara realized she was asking questions too large for words, questions that might never find answers. Later that day, the silence shattered. The distant thunder of hooves rolled across the prairie. Clara's heart stopped. She ran to the porch, eyes straining against the horizon. Dust rose in the distance. Another group of riders approached, not Comanche this time. Settlers, armed, grim, determined. The warriors at her fence mounted swiftly, bows drawn. Their voices cut the air in sharp commands. The settlers' posse slowed only when they saw the line of Comanche blocking their path. Clara's breath came fast, her body frozen between the two forces. She could feel the hatred radiating from both sides, centuries of blood feuds ready to ignite in her yard. And she was the spark. The leader of the posse shouted, voice booming across the distance. Clara, step away from them. We know what you've done. You've sheltered a savage, and you'll answer for it. Her knees nearly buckled. They knew. Whether by rumor or suspicion, they knew. One of the Comanche warriors barked something in their own tongue, raising his spear high. The settlers cocked their rifles in response. The air crackled, seconds away from eruption, and Clara, caught in the middle, felt the weight of her choice bear down upon her. She glanced toward the barn, where Dakota lay hidden, and back toward the men who once called her neighbor. Every path demanded sacrifice. Every decision threatened destruction. Her voice broke the tension, though it shook with fear. "Stop!" she cried, stepping forward into the open, hands raised. "If blood is spilled here, it will drown us all." For a heartbeat, both sides hesitated. The prairie held its breath. But hesitation was fragile, and fire burned on both horizons. Clara knew the storm had not passed. It had only paused, waiting to see which way she would turn. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, suspended between powder and flame. Clara stood in the yard, her hands raised, the bitter wind tugging at her hair as two worlds stared her down. To her right, the posse of settlers, rifles gleaming with deadly certainty. To her left, the line of Comanche warriors, bows taut with ancestral fury. At her back, the barn held Dakota, the wounded man whose survival had birthed the storm. Her voice trembled, but she forced it into the charged silence. "No more blood," she pleaded, each word scraping her throat raw. "Not here. Not today." The posse leader, a man named Briggs with a scar carved down his cheek, spurred his horse forward a few paces. His rifle never wavered from the Comanche. "You've already spilled it by bringing him into your home, Clara. You think these people would spare you when they've burned cabins and left graves in their wake? Hand him over, and maybe you walk away with your roof still standing." The words bit deep. Clara's fingers curled into fists. Briggs's voice carried the weight of survival, of law twisted into vengeance, but it was not justice. It was retribution, merciless, endless. The Comanche elder, who had returned silently with the dawn, raised his hand. The warriors held steady, eyes fixed on Clara. In their gaze was no mercy either, only judgment. To them, she was an enigma, a woman who dared cross a line no settler ever had. Would she betray the man she had healed? Or would she defy her own people for the sake of one life? Dakota's faint voice broke the standoff. He had dragged himself to the barn's doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. Pain etched every line of his body, yet his eyes blazed with clarity. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, yet commanding enough that every head turned. "Choice is yours. Mine already made." Her heart twisted. He stood exposed, offering himself to fate. Both sides tensed, fingers tightening on triggers and bowstrings. Clara's breath came quick, her mind racing. She thought of her husband's death years ago, of the endless solitude she had borne since. She thought of the settlers who never truly welcomed her, and the warriors whose world had been stolen piece by piece. She thought of mercy. How rare, how costly, how desperately needed. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady now. "If either of you want blood, then take mine. But I will not hand over the wounded. Not him. Not today." The words rang across the prairie like a bell struck in judgment. Briggs spat into the dirt. "Fool woman, you've signed your own death warrant." He raised his rifle, finger curling on the trigger. Before the shot cracked, an arrow whistled through the air, splintering the wood of Briggs's saddle. His horse reared, nearly unseating him. The Comanche elder barked a command, and the warriors bristled with readiness. Chaos teetered on the edge of eruption, but Clara's scream cut through the fury. "Stop! Enough!" Her voice was raw, but it carried. "You call them savages, Briggs, but look at yourselves. You'll murder a man too weak to stand. And you," she turned to the Comanche elder, "you think me a coward? I've kept him alive when the earth itself tried to claim him. If that is weakness, then tell me what is strength." Her words cracked something deeper than silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Dakota lifted his chin, his breath labored. "Mercy is strength," he said, his voice breaking yet unyielding. His gaze swept across both sides, daring them to deny him. For a moment, The prairie stood at a crossroads. The Comanche elder studied Clara with a gaze sharp as flint. Finally, he lowered his hand. One by one, the warriors eased their bows, though their eyes never left the settlers. Briggs cursed under his breath, fury burning in his features. He wanted violence, wanted to erase the humiliation of being defied by a woman. But the rifles at his back wavered. Some of the posse shifted uneasily, their faces etched with doubt. They had come for blood, but Clara's defiance and Dakota's frailty had stripped the fight of its righteousness. At last, Briggs snarled, "This isn't over." He yanked his reins, wheeling his horse around. With a jerk of his head, he ordered his men to follow. One by one, they turned, retreating into the horizon, their dust swallowed by the prairie's endless mouth. Clara nearly collapsed with relief. Her knees buckled, but she held herself upright, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. The Comanche elder rode closer, his expression unreadable. He regarded Clara long and hard before speaking in a voice low yet weighty. "You saved one of ours. You defied your own. The fire you stand in is not quenched, but today you walk unburned." He gestured toward Dakota. "His life is yours, until he can stand again." Then, with a signal, the warriors turned and rode off into the distance, leaving Clara's homestead shrouded in the fragile stillness of survival. Only the wind remained, carrying away the echoes of what might have been slaughter. Clara rushed to Dakota, supporting his weakened frame back into the barn. He sank against the hay, his strength nearly gone, but his eyes never left hers. Gratitude, fierce and unspoken, lived there. "You risked everything," he whispered. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I chose mercy. The world has enough vengeance already." He reached for her hand, his touch weak, but steady. In that simple gesture, Clara felt the weight of everything they had endured, the hatred of neighbors, the suspicion of warriors, the endless burden of history pressing upon their shoulders. And yet, in that moment, there was something else. Hope. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and uncertain. Tomorrow would bring whispers, accusations, perhaps even more danger. But Clara knew this much. She had chosen her path. She had chosen mercy over fear, humanity over hate. The fire might never die, but she had proven it could be resisted. And perhaps, just perhaps, that resistance could kindle something new. As night fell, Clara lit a lamp in her window, its glow reaching into the dark like a fragile promise. Dakota slept, his breathing steady at last, while the world beyond waited, restless and watching. Clara whispered to the silence, to the stars that knew more of mercy than men, "Let tomorrow come. I will meet it." And in the hush that followed, the prairie answered only with the sound of the wind, gentle, endless, and free.